Your kids say that now, but keep at it for a few more years, and then these little black bricks are gonna become your entire lives. This week, we opened on our heroines enjoying some lollipops, and I think Ron trying out a bunch of new catchphrases.
Wubba lubba dub dub! Ricky ticky taffy, yeah!
She then took pictures of her partially eaten pop, though thankfully not of her friends' faces because, well... Hi, Aoyama! See you still loving that good old Control CV for all of your faces. She claimed she was doing all of this because she wanted to spread happiness to everyone, which isn't that just the mantra of the Precure? Well, anyway, she then got an idea of how she could spread the joy after seeing some kids playing with a bubble wand. We're trying to hold back on the NC references, please. This week's opening was also replaced with previews of the upcoming film, which, yeah, I still don't have any interest in talking about it right now. I don't know, other than some nice shots here and there, it doesn't really feel like there's much to talk about, you know, other than the obvious twist villain being obvious. Anyway, back to the episode proper. Ron had gotten the idea to invent a new kind of candy with the properties of soap bubbles. We'll discuss the practicality of that in just a minute, but yeah, kind of suddenly, Ron's an inventor. Now, I do say kind of suddenly, as there was that bit from the camping episode a couple weeks back where she made a drink hat. Which, as one of my commenters kind of correctly pointed out, that would have been an interesting little attribute to put a little more focus on, especially if it's going to be brought back here. I mean, sure, a drink hat is nothing revolutionary in the slightest.
They found a whole warehouse full of them. They're worthless!
But her being able to build stuff would be an interesting little attribute to highlight, especially considering what the current general they were fighting was. Interestingly, both this and the camping episode were written by Mutsumi Ito, so you'd think she'd try to highlight a little more, but I guess she also had to handle the introduction of this tin can. But anyway, it was time for Ron Sensei's very questionable science. Yeah, I did my best to research this one, and as far as I can tell, it really shouldn't be possible to make candy bubbles, at least not the way Ron was trying to do it. I mean, as far as we can tell here, they're using a mixture of water and corn syrup, which are two of the three ingredients used to make homemade bubbles, but of course, they're not putting in the most important ingredient, actual soap, or at least I hope they're not. Without it, they're basically just making syrupy water. Now, of course, they could be using other chemicals as binders, but one, I don't think these middle school girls should be handling chemicals, especially for something that's going to be eaten. And two, even then, I don't think you can really produce a bubble with a wand in this case. The closest candy bubbles I could find were ones made with melted Jolly Ranchers and straws, which, by the way, I don't think anyone should attempt to blow into molten sugar like that. But yeah, unless it's made with actual soap, none of this should really be possible. Feel free to correct me in the comments section below, but in general, this whole plot seems very contrived to me, especially when it's combined with the actual main plot of this episode that we'll get to. Though yeah, I am thinking that this reused Ojamajo design is going to play a more important role next week. But anyway, this episode also brought in Ron's younger siblings who, yeah, I also forgot existed. Together, they made some homemade ice cream, which, yeah, I guess they needed some actual food in this episode. Though, as someone who's made it for Aoi's Lion Gelato, yeah, I think you should just stick with the store-bought stuff. But yeah, the point of this kind of pointless sidebar was to get Ron's siblings to notice Komi Komi's tail and ears and make her self-conscious about them. Just go ask for some advice from the dragons. I'm sure they'll be able to give you a few pointers. But yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really buy into this conflict at all. I mean, I'm not saying kids don't become self-conscious over the differences in their appearance, but one, Ron's siblings weren't even being mean or even called her strange, because of course, the show has to play everything safe, so actual bullying, outside the villains, isn't a thing. And two, when has this ever been a thing with the Fox Fairy? She's never really seemed to pay attention to the fact that she's been evolving every other episode, which, yeah, we'll get to that in just a bit. So it just feels out of place and a source of some unearned melodrama. Not helped by the fact that, oh yeah, this was also supposed to be an episode about making candy bubbles. I mean, they tried to connect the stories by having Ron confess that when she was younger, she was also afraid of being called weird over what sorts of food she liked. She didn't really elaborate on this because really, I don't think most people worry about sharing what food they like, and just said that everyone enjoyed hearing her talk about food, which I guess led to her becoming a food Instagrammer. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous how tacked on some of these plot points feel, kind of like. Ron, don't encourage the kids to take the first steps towards becoming a furry. But yeah, Ron's half-assed cosplay gave her the confidence to not only let her ears and tail out, but also, grow out her hair a little. Oh yeah, that too. I mean, geez, it's just been so long since her last evolution, like, what, 3 episodes ago? I mean, granted, self-acceptance is a better excuse to evolve than choosing not to be a selfish little brat, but again, who even cares at this point if they do it this frequently? Don't even try to justify it at this point, dude. Oh, and also, Ron had somehow perfected her impossible bubble candy. I mean, this really hasn't been all that much related to the Komi Komi plot, but rather, it was for this. How? So, because Spiritor took a lollipop fairy, I'm guessing every food that had corn syrup like Ron's bubbles were affected, even though it's been established that affected foods need to have at least some sort of similar preparation, and obviously air bubbles are very different from round discs that are made from hardened sugar, and all sorts of different food colorings mixed in.
She's sinking! The plot is sinking! Quick, hire the emergency writers!
So yeah, for anyone who might say, I should just suspend my disbelief in regards to the candy bubbles, well, sorry I can't when it's clearly put into the episode for such arbitrary and world-breaking reasons. Anyway, fight of the week was with Pond Spring Monster, and while I'll admit there were some nice sequences here, it was still an Aoyama episode. So there were still some clearly cut corners. Not helped by the fact that much of the fight was won through that good old Takno Jutsu, as Ron and Yui tried to explain the greatness of tasty foods to the robot who, unlike a certain android built to blend in amongst humans, shouldn't even have taste buds. Dude, just look up calories, that's literally its definition. But yeah, this was also, on top of everything else, supposed to be an important plot episode for Spiritor. As for why...
Remote override engaged? No! Yes! Bypassing override! I am alone!
I mean, okay, while I am legit glad we don't have to listen to that toaster oven and his annoying voice anymore, it's kinda sudden just to seemingly kill him off as a means of a cheap cliffhanger for next week. Oh, and in case you didn't realize it was a cliffhanger... Also, I'm just adding this in last minute, but I just realized Ron didn't get an upgraded attack like her teammates in this episode. This episode... I don't know, it just kind of felt out of place. I mean, I'm not saying the lesson of self-acceptance is a bad one in any sort of way, but one, it's never really been a thing with Komi Komi, and two, isn't this the season all about food? And this episode just didn't connect strongly to that theme, especially in regards to the food victim of the week. Hell, I even have a hard time really calling this a Ron character development episode, especially when you bring in almost a brand new attribute to resolve the conflict. So okay, as usual, I guess we could excuse some of the insanely rushed pace of this episode because of the hack. I mean, I don't want to believe anyone thought it was a good idea to blend essentially 3 very different plot points together into one. Between Ron's candy bubbles, Komi Komi's 300th evolution, and Spiritor's deactivation, I don't think there was any way to really blend them all well together. That said, individually, these plot points still weren't all that well executed. I already went over the questionable science of Ron's bubbles and their very forced connection with the victim of the week. I mean, if there are multiple types of cake fairies, how is it that one corn syrup based candy fairy can affect all of them? Komi Komi's evolution, on top of having lost all meaning at this point, other than as a means of a cheap plug for their upcoming film, still didn't feel quite earned to me. I mean, yes, this is an issue that some kids will go through, especially in Japan's still kind of xenophobic culture, but that's exactly why it shouldn't be just a one-off story that kind of comes out of nowhere, and yet this seems to be Toei's MO. Lastly, while again I'll say I'm personally glad we're rid of him, I'll also admit that Spiritor's deactivation felt very rushed and forced. Sure, he might come back later, but having him suddenly gain taste sentience didn't make a lot of sense. But again, this just feels like another episode that represents the season really well. A lot of half-baked yet overly safe ideas that are just thrown together with little rhyme or reason. I don't know when exactly, but I think this series popped its bubble a long time ago. Somehow, we actually managed to get that little 6 Ranger project we had going done. And while I'm not going to come out here and say it was the most in-depth or analytical video essay we've ever done, it is one that we are kind of proud of, so do check it out, especially if you're into 6 Rangers as much as I am, and how this season really needed work on its own. And until next time though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to use this soap to do a little cleaning around the place. Damn, these bloodstains are so hard to get rid of once they dry in.